Okay, so welcome everybody to our December edition of our Maker Roundtable. I am Scout Mary with Missouri Assistive Technology, and Mike Marotta, who also heads this up, could not be here today, but Naomi is here with us, who has muted herself. And so, thanks everybody for coming and being a part of this. This is a really informal space. We are just kind of getting together to share our information and our resources and troubleshoot any problems that folks might have come up with over the last month. But also today, we're going to start with Ken, who has a well, Ken, I'm just going to let you describe your slides that you have to kind of start us off on some discussion today. So unless anybody has anything they want to jump in with, we'll go ahead and start with that.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Go ahead.
So I think at the last meeting, I brought up this topic of understanding who your customers are, and meaning the customers of your DIY implementation, not necessarily the end customer, the disabled individual, but to get your device into the hands of someone who's disabled, you need to take into consideration those people who would actually do the implementation. And so I've been stewing on this for years, actually. And I was on my soapbox for a little bit last meeting, which I apologize for right in advance. But I think there's a better way, maybe not the best way, to approach these kinds of things. And I told Mike that I'd love to put together some slides, put my thinking down on paper on what I think that approach might be. And I've always, for many years, I've thought I'd love to give a presentation at an AT Maker conference on this very topic, because I see lots of effort that seems to me to be misdirected or ineffective in some way. And so let me just jump in and say that, yeah, my hope is that this would someday be a presentation at an AT Maker conference. So let me share my screen and then go into slideshow mode. So let me know, can you see the slide? All right, I'm going to move you guys out of the way of my notes. So this is going to be very general, very high level. I want to talk about the process of making AT, DIY AT in particular. And I'm going to talk about some different approaches to that process, or different processes, different approaches to doing this. And I'm sure there are more than I've included here. And by the way, I'd love to hear from you if you think you have a distinctive other process, because I'd like to work that into this presentation. I also realize that for any one of the things I'm going to show here as a lesser approach, I believe that I'm sure there are valid reasons why that approach is appropriate in that circumstance. Still, I believe that some approaches are better. They help more people than others, and some approaches help significantly more people. All right, so this is the classic design and implementation process that most of us have learned if you have any manufacturing or engineering background. So there's initially a statement of needs, a recognition that there's a need out there that's unfulfilled. Then one designs a solution, a potential solution. You implement that potential solution, you trial that solution, you take the feedback from the trial, and say, well, we missed some needs along the way, clearly, because our design didn't meet all of the needs. They weren't all enumerated. And then you redesign, re-implement, retrial, and it's an iterative process. So that's just the classic approach to design and implementation. So who could be assigned these tasks in the assistive technology world? Well, let's think of there are many disabled individuals, and this number I got of 60 million comes from CDC, of all places. There are a number of therapists, 600,000 therapists out there per the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And then I said, wasn't quite sure where to get the number of makers in the US, AT makers, not just makers out there making tables and whatever. And so I turned to Makers Making Change and just asked them to swag it. And so they gave me a couple of different numbers. I rolled those together and came up with roughly 5,000 individuals. So with that in mind, with these as the potential people to be assigned tasks in the process, where does the most leverage exist to getting successful products in the hands of as many people as possible? I believe it's this middle number, the 600,000 therapists. So just with that in mind, let's look at some processes. So this is one I'm calling the one-off. A therapist or a disabled individual develops a statement of needs likely for a specific individual. Then a maker comes in, maybe someone that the therapist knows or the disabled individual knows, or someone responding to a need on a Facebook post. They're a master maker because they just have this incredible set of skills that they can touch all kinds of different technologies and materials. And they design and implement the device based on this, what they've heard from this therapist and or disabled individual. They deliver that to the therapist or the individual, and that device gets trialed. Then there is the potential feedback loop. Unfortunately, it turns out that providing feedback is typically difficult in this scenario. Number one, the therapist and the individual, they don't want to disappoint that maker by saying, oh, this really doesn't meet my needs at all, or it doesn't meet my needs in this way. They just don't want to disappoint that person because, you know what, they're a master maker, for one, and they seem like this incredible individual with all these skills, and they just don't want to disappoint that person. Also, that person may have already moved on, depending on how close the relationship is. So you just can't give them the feedback. So there's a problem with the feedback process in general. But I believe that once this solution is designed, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to document it because it's often specific to a particular individual. By the way, the critical thing here is that the maker themselves is in the critical path. No device is going to get made without the maker to make it, to implement it. Here's my next scenario, my second of three. And this one I just call into the ether. So there's a development of a statement of need. A maker comes along. Sometimes it's a set of makers in association with 18 maker conferences, typically. And they design and maybe implement, maybe not even implement. If they implement it, it's in very prototypical form. They design and implement a device. It's unclear whether it ever gets used by anyone. It may get some immediate trial kind of thing, but it's unclear whether anybody ever gets it into their hands. And then there's, time is running short, so the design is posted somewhere. And there's lots of variation in terms of where that thing is posted. A therapist or an individual may come along and discover this thing posted, and if they can discover it at all, and then request that of some maker, and then the maker implements it, trials the device, it gets trialed, and then, but there's really no way to provide feedback. It still just sits there in this static posted format. And often that, for people who are in 3D land or 3D printing land, that posted format is an STL file. So it's even harder to modify than if it were in some more source style format. So the feedback loop is kind of a dead end. A maker is, again, part of the critical path here. No device is delivered without a maker. But the fact that it goes and simply gets posted, there's no, the quality of the site that it's posted on really goes a long way to determine whether it'll ever see the light of day. My case that I made last month is, if you put it on GitHub, it's not going to see the light of day. All right. So then the third one has lots more boxes, so it must be better. So there's a germ of an idea out there, a germ of a description of a need, and instead you assemble a team. You don't put this in the hands of some maker to kind of wizard up a solution. You assemble a team, and that team involves makers, therapists, and possibly the disabled individuals. Sometimes it's the therapists simply represent the disabled individuals, but it's critical to have this component, I'm pointing at the wrong page, this person on that team. The therapist has to be part of that team. And they design, test, and redesign as a team. The solution is owned as a team. The design is, well, let's see. It's designed to be implemented by therapists, caregivers, and possibly the disabled individual themselves. That's part of the design process. Part of the requirements for the design is it has to be implemented, has to be implementable by people other than a highly skilled maker. And that's possible. You just got to work a little harder in the design process. You want to post that design to make it available to as many people as possible, but the site you choose, the location you choose is critical here. Where do you post it so it's going to have the most visibility? It has to be well documented. It can't be just, we give you a paragraph of why we think it's valuable and maybe some schematics or something, but well documented and supported. So once you put it up there, you're committed to supporting that design too. And you have to provide a way for downstream individuals to provide feedback. The team is responsible for supporting this, that team that you established up here. The team is also responsible for promoting that design when they get the opportunity, even if it's only to the people who work with them in whatever organization or school district or whatever they're part of. But they promote that design. So it's getting additional visibility through that promotion. These therapists are much better at promoting a device than a maker is going to be, or than a static site is going to be. So now that design is discovered more easily by individuals like these therapists. It's designed to be customizable. That's key here. It has to, because the needs of the target audience are so varied, you have to build customization into the design. If you can't build customization into the design, it's either because this thing is generic enough that it actually meets a lot of people's needs in one form, or you're going to meet the needs of one individual. So look for ways to build variability into the design. I love it if you can build personalization into the design. Allow for a way for the end user to make this special for them alone. So the design process, the implementation process has to easily support personalization as well as customization. And then you put it in the hands of individuals to test for themselves, because it can be customized, updated, personalized. They can just feedback directly here, but we also would love to see that feedback come all the way back through this form for feedback.
Hey, Ken.
Yeah.
I have a question. So when I look at this design for X, this makes me think of like the Go Baby Go projects. Is that kind of in line with what you're thinking?
I'm not sure. I'm not very familiar with that. Design for X in engineering means design for implementation, design for customization, design for assembly, design for testing. It's you put something in there. You
Right.
designed it to make that process simple and inexpensive. In my case, in the case of this slide, you've designed it for implementation by people who aren't specialists. You've designed it for customization and personalization.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you're designing it for people who aren't specialists means you're also building in that design for assembly, design for test, design for troubleshooting, whatever. That's all also easy. So how do you leverage the force multiplication capability of therapists? Remember, therapists, there's 600,000 of them out there. There was a time, at least I've heard this from physical therapists, where DIY was part of their training. And I see that when I work with physical therapists, that they're really kind of on board with the whole DIY thing. I see that as well with occupational therapists, and to a degree, not as much with speech language pathologists. But you don't have to, if people are designing in customization and all that easy implementation, you can also turn to another really valuable force multiplier out there called STEM programs to provide that technological whatever support. So how do you leverage that force multiplication of 600,000 therapists, all who have some portfolio of individuals that they're serving, that they are already aware of their needs and how you might meet their needs. So they have knowledge, they have access to individuals for a list of needs and for testing of devices. Well, you have to recruit those therapists to your team. And this is the one place I know of where you can get easy access to a set of therapists who might be willing to join a team for free. This is DIY. There's in my realm, it's all open source. There's no desire to create a product that you're going to sell. So you have to be able to manage, excite and manage people as volunteers, because you're not going to be able to pay them. But this is a way to get people to volunteer. This is a huge mailing list that sends out mail every day, or sends mail every day, and you can post to this, and there are no huge restrictions other than not trying to sell your product there. How do you design for therapists to implement? Well, first of all, you have to understand what kind of maker skill is common to therapists. And this is a pointer back to why we were talking about this at all last month. You have to understand also the time and financial resources available for therapists. If you're going to design something that's going to cost a significant amount of money just to implement the first time, therapists, they got to get that money from somewhere. It's probably not from their wallets, given how much they're paid. So you have to understand that, and also this time factor. You're only going to be able to keep their involvement for so long. It has to be quick and easy to implement something, and it has to have high value as a result. Then you have to also understand the equipment available to therapists, and this hit me about a couple of weeks ago when I saw that Prusa had come out with a new printer, an XL printer that was this huge format. And I thought, boy, you could do some cool key guards with that because it's big. And then I thought, but nobody's going to have that. So if you just come up with a design that requires a print bed that's 400 millimeters wide, well, nobody's going to implement your key guard. You better come up with a key guard that can be segmented somehow from a smaller format. So you have to keep in mind what's really out there, available to your typical therapist, even through a STEM program. And then I think this is maybe it's incumbent on the team, because the maker often doesn't have the visibility into this, but you got to figure out as a team how you can reduce or eliminate the barriers to implementation for those therapists downstream here. Back, where do I go back? I go like this, previous. For these therapists down here, you got to think ahead of time how you're going to reduce barriers for them to the cost, the time, and any hesitation, restrictions, whatever their environment may place on them. So with that in mind, this is where I wanted to kind of focus folks last month. How do you get this information? If you want to design for therapists, how do you get this information? And that's it for me.
Yeah, I watched last month's, I wasn't able to attend, but I watched last month's meeting, and it was interesting to me to hear different people. It was almost like confession, you know, like what people feel confident doing and what people don't feel confident doing, or even like to do or don't like to do. You know, everybody comes to this table with a completely different skill set, and putting it out there like these are the skills necessary to create this device. I think really is important, but also, you know, as people have talked, like how do you build the skill? I've never done that, but the learning curve seems big, but in actuality, it's not that big. And so, yeah, how to break down that seems to me a piece as well.
Yeah, and by the way, I would add, Scott, if you can come up with a design that doesn't require the development of a skill, then again, you've made the likelihood of implementation that much greater.
I 100% agree, but for me, the development of the skill is something even like using a ratcheting PVC pipe cutter. You know, that's a, you know, whether it's using a 3D printer or a PVC pipe cutter, if the person hasn't ever done it before, then it's an unknown. You know, it's a black box and just doing that. So, you know, I think there is a time to say like this skill development is only this big, but you know, here's where we start. But I agree, the less skills you have to learn for any design, the more likely the therapist in this case is to implement. Personally, I also really like that in the very beginning when you talked about disappointing the maker, and you know that if that becomes the barrier, that's like how do you get rid of that piece? It's like getting rid of ego or something. More theoretical discussion than we want to get into, but
I think it'd be right to talk to makers about, or not makers, therapists about what keeps them from giving real feedback to the people, the technologists that they're working with. I don't know if it's because they feel that the technologists are just incapable of accepting feedback, which sometimes they are. They're just very sensitive folks, very defensive folks. I may be one. Engineers are like that. But or it's just a case of they're so smart. I must be doing something wrong, or I don't know what it is.
Well, and I think also I think sometimes it's the process as well. Like we had something come up here early on where somebody had an idea, it was created, there was feedback, but it was exact case, that guy was gone, you know, and so to modify that piece of equipment It may have happened off of here, or it may have just ended. But for the rest of us that kind of viewed this, we don't know what happened. Did the guy move on? Was it, his idea that he really liked? And when he found out that he didn't have all the information, because that's part of the thing, like you said, he didn't have all the information, was he frustrated? So it was, yeah, I mean, real life scenario was exactly what you laid out for our worm hooker. Yeah, and how to get that out. And I think that's part of the conversation of like that anybody who would consider themselves a maker has to understand that it's a process, that it is not generally a one design and done. It is a process that has to have flexibility built into a design for it not to be a one-off. What are some other thoughts?
What do you think, Rich?
Yeah.
So I'm looking down.
All right, so I'm in a university environment, and so we have a lot of students who want to make something, and then they graduate, so they're gone. So that support just isn't there. Like the next students want to make something too. They don't want to fix something that last year's students made. So the sustainability part of the whole thing is just, I've never figured out a good way to, a good mechanism to make the whole thing sustainable.
So Rick, I'm tempted to say that problem sits with you. I don't want to be rude here, but first of all, picking up a given an already created design and modifying it so it meets a need better. My God, I did that for 30 years for Bell Labs. So that is part of engineering. And so kids shouldn't come out of college thinking that, oh, you got to work on everything, that you're creating a brand new thing every time. No, a large part of your work is going to be modifying an existing design so that it either has additional functionality or is easier to use or just works better in the first place. And I also have worked with an organization here that had an interface to University of Colorado, their little engineering undergraduate group, and they would produce something, kind of a real limited prototype, and then they'd graduate. And it didn't quite meet the needs, and it went on a shelf at that service provider. And you would just see things collect there and think, why in the world isn't anybody providing feedback to the university, to the professor in charge of that group, and saying, let's make this a living relationship, not something that is, you guys get to send something to us which really doesn't quite meet our needs, and then you feel you're done. Sorry for.
No. I mean, I think so. Typically, you have to do this in the context of a club or some sort of out of school thing, because when you're running a class, you have to know what your assignments are going to be before it starts. So outside of a class in a club, you've got to motivate the students, and I can give them the speech of going and doing tech support is really just what engineers are really going to do, whether that really motivates them. So it may be a failing on my part to be appropriately cheerleading about the whole thing, but there's only the thing that motivates our students is gets them to come, that gets them excited about coming to the meetings and getting involved in this is meeting somebody, doing what they building something new. And
I'd be happy to talk with you offline about this too, but I've also found, and this is back in Bell Labs as well, what motivates a developer is knowing they're producing something of value to a customer. And meeting the customer is even really powerful. So I don't know that there's anything to prevent whatever organization this club was working with to prevent you from meeting the recipient of the end device and getting that feedback and refining a device so it really meets somebody's needs. That's what motivates people.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say is that if they see a modified design working for somebody, getting some kid doing X that they couldn't do before, that's the key.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a long distance between building something new and redesigning something. And in that middle gap is things like training the new caregiver, going and replacing the batteries, providing training, and that sort of stuff. That support is critical to make this stuff work. And that's the stuff that somebody calls me in October, this thing isn't working right now. Well, our club started last, a couple of weeks ago. I can have a student out there in 2 weeks. Well, I don't think that's going to work for me. So, you gave this to me in Pittsburgh. I've now moved to Harrisburg. Can you come fix this for me? Right? There's sustainability issues with this.
Yeah, welcome to the life of engineers. I mean, if you can send a kid out into the real world with real world experience, isn't that even better? That they're not all going to sit around a whiteboard with their friends like it's some sort of stock photo, drawing on the board, coming up with wild ideas. No, the real world is actually getting out there and making something fit for somebody.
Yeah, and I think, the big difference between Tobii Dynavox or Permobil is if your thing breaks down, you're going to get it fixed the next day. If our thing breaks down, we'll try to get to you, right? And that sustainability part is the thing that I've always struggled with.
So what kinds of things are they making? Like what designs are they working on?
So we're a small university, so we're pretty. We have a group of hackers that last year we made. We had a young girl that was working on cause and effect, I guess, and liked doors. So we made something that, when she opened the door, we got some of those cards that, had the, that make the noise when you open them up, and we reconfigured those so that when she opened the doors, on this little cardboard thing, it would play some music. All right. it was a toy and it was nice. Most recently, we just made a page turner for a little girl who, she likes reading those hard, the books with the hard pages with the material in them. So it's like a really narrow, specific thing that you can't replace with an ebook. And so we've made those things. That's 2 years of making. And there's that page turner just went down to North Carolina. So no, we're not going to go do on-site tech support if that thing doesn't work exactly right. The toy for the girl with the opening, that went to a suburb of Philadelphia. We're in Pittsburgh, so that's 5 hours away. We had a lot of video conferences with the parents, and we made something that we think is going to be enjoyable at that girl's current level of development, and what she's interested in. But if it gets there and something is wrong, then it's tough to.
But what a great project now. You got a design for maintenance issue with that product. And so to bring that back to your team and say, how do we design this in such a way that it's easy for the caregiver to maintain?
Mhm.
And therefore, and how can we get out of the middle? How can we get out of this process? We don't want to be in the critical path for this. So
Right. And
what a great project.
so, yeah, and that's kind of like a separate project, right? Because in the moment, you just want to make this thing for this toy for this girl before she grows out of it. And if I say, we're going to spend 6 months figuring out how to make this such that it is, has this sustainability to it, then by the time we get something to her, she'll be on to, Disney's Frozen or something else. And, that's
So
right.
like
I mean,
time
that's
for customization. Just great. I mean,
Right.
these
I
are
mean,
wonderful.
and maybe part of the idea is you make two, because if you're making one, you could make two, you send one off. And if there's a feature that is like breaking too easily, you trade and you work on that piece that's not working. And then, you can do different iterations or whatever it is that is for the next
okay.
person.
So we're
Yeah, I mean, it's just
funds,
options.
right? So we're raising funds to buy all this stuff,
Right.
and we're covering. We're raising enough funds that we can cover the cost of making one and shipping one. As soon as we start making two of everything and shipping things back and forth constantly, it gets that much harder.
Sure. Yeah, we're throwing out some options that sound easy, but there's real life barriers for you. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest, what Rick is doing is, well, it can fit in the process. It's just hard to do with an after-school club, though. What you'd want to do is get these kids as freshmen to keep them for 4 years in the club, and then you do have some consistency throughout and more time to come up with solutions and improve on them. But yeah, you guys, like I tell it, the key part of all of these processes, as far as I'm concerned, is get the makers out of the loop. Come up with designs that are simple enough for anybody to implement. No, not anybody, but some motivated individuals to implement. They don't have to have special skills, and because you do not want to be a supplier of this device. Then you have all this tremendous overhead. You want to be somebody who comes up with a design. That's your intellectual property, is your design. And you'll take feedback on it and you'll improve on the design to make it designed for X. But you want to get out of the manufacturing and shipping and support process.
Mm-hmm. And Rich, I appreciate your position today to, for us to kind of bounce some things back and forth. And I don't think I think you're probably a really good idea of a person in the maker's space, like trying really hard and coming up against all these barriers that, Ken has been discussing. It's like, it's just not easy to make things work properly. And I think that's, part of the group is where are the pieces of the process that how can we think about things to make things more workable? I mean, I think that's your slides. It's like, how do we think about this? How do we attack this not problem, but challenge?
Okay. It's a problem.
Yeah.
It's a problem if it's not working.
Right. Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, the fun thing is that sometimes it works wonderfully. We come up with a design and we give it to an individual and they're ecstatic, and that's the juice. We're like, this is cool, but then we hit those bumps, and And how do you make the whole process a little more smooth? Yeah.
But you have to embrace DIY. Do it yourself. Okay? Do it yourself. I'm not going to be there for you all the time. So
And
I
I
need to
think
give
that-
you enough support that you can confidently begin to and do it yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, and I frequently look on instructables because that's where, that's my go-to spot to look for fun things. And, I'll scroll through like, oh, this one has too many steps. This one has too many skills. This one, I'm just not quite interested in what I clicked on. But it is like, what are those, what are those barriers? Because yeah, there's nobody on instructables that's going to come and be like, here, let me come over and help you.
But thanks for speaking up, Rich. It was
Well, I mean, I'm basically at, I think you're method 1 of your 3 methods. And I'd love to get to method 3. I've never figured out that sustainability part.
okay.
Is the thing that I keep, the mechanism I look for, or I've been trying to come up with.
Okay, and thank you for the segue, because I think that in order to make that option 3 possible, you have to understand the abilities of your target audience, the therapist. And that's what we were trying to figure out. Is there a survey approach here? What would be the questions in the survey to tease out what your typical therapist is even willing to get involved with?
So I'm in an OT department.
Okay.
And we're in the middle of our relicensing thing. So I just spent a couple of hours going through our ACOT standards and the education standards and stuff. So if you have an engineering background, ABET, the engineering accreditation. OT has its own accreditation, and it is incredibly specific, much more prescriptive than ABET, which just has a couple of criteria. And it tells you exactly what every OT program that's licensed is supposed to be teaching every graduate. And I'm pretty sure the PT one is similarly prescriptive. So you can find, without even doing a survey, get a pretty good idea of what OTs leave knowing. And I think part of our goal here at Duquesne is generating more OTs that have these making skills. So kind of growing the skill set and seeding it. So we have a minor where we teach OT students how to do some electronics and some 3D printing and programming and cardboard carpentry and stuff. We're not going to make them engineers, but we'd like them to be able to follow in instructables by the time they're done. Mm-hmm. And I think rather than trying
I didn't realize you are a heck of a resource then, as far as you really have insight into then sort of saying, what could we expect of your graduates?
Right. So the ones in our minor anyway. So right now it's not a requirement. And, and I'm growing it, we're trying to get as many of them in there as we can. But yeah, I mean, I think part of it is understanding where clinicians are now. And part of it is growing the skill set, within the new clinicians to, so that they are actually comfortable. If you gave them, a CAD file, then, doing 3D printing. I mean, I think I just saw a 3D printer for like $200. I mean, eventually those are going to be in clinics. The OTs need, but OTs don't know how to use them. So, I mean, that I think is the next step, getting this stuff into the curriculum so that the OTs are there and ready, and the PTs and the speech language pathologists when it actually hits.
Yep.
Yeah, building that confidence.
And there are lots of options that don't require a local 3D printer. So somebody else can do the 3D printing for you. what I think, yeah, you can buy that service,
Right.
in a lot of ways. But just the confidence at approaching a problem that may involve that as a step.
Right. Or even, pulling up Tinkercad and customizing something, to go from the child size to the adult size.
Mhm.
And then, generating the model that you send off to somebody to 3D print for you.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's definitely a skill set that requires that level of either skill or confidence or just knowledge to be able to, yeah, modify or just rapidly produce, have the file there and know that you can do it. I don't think it's like, I think Ken is saying it's not really required, but I think if 3D printers are going to be around, why not have that skill set available with your captive audience? If I'm going to take a break real quick, usually during these groups, we like do just a shout out to see if anybody has a current problem that they want to discuss today. So it is coming close to 10 till. So if anybody brought something that they wanted to, get some people thinking about, please unmute or put it in the chat and tell us. Otherwise, we'll probably just, finish out our hour with our interesting discussion. But I really want to give folks a chance. So I'm not seeing anybody unmuting or typing in anything. So I'm going to assume that either you've left your desk or that you're good with our discussion. So, but we are getting, like I said, close to the top of the hour. So we can have a little bit more discussion, and I would love to hear from other folks who have been quiet this meeting. If anybody has anything they want to throw out. Sarah. Okay. Well, Sarah, thanks for coming. But if anybody else has a similar issue, that you've run up against, or you want to throw something out, don't be shy.
I think I just want to add, because Rich, I'm also in an OT department at a school that is primarily an engineering school, which you would think would create phenomenal opportunities for collaboration, but we find that really challenging in practice. And part of that is kind of just making schedules work, but we've also found that part of it is finding a common language between our OT students and our engineering students, coming into, similar ideas with kind of just very different, I don't know if perspectives is the right word, but there's often kind of a communication gap, I think, there. It's not a solution. It's probably just another challenge to throw on the pile. But
what communication gaps? Can you give us an example?
So let me give you an example of a student. So I oversee some of our master's capstones, and I often have students who come in with grand ideas of they're going to design this fabulous new piece of AT. And sometimes I'm often in the unfortunate position of having to be the person who says, we have a year. We're not going to fix the world in a year. But one of my students a couple years ago wanted to tackle building a new dressing stick. So if, because her gripe from her own personal experience was, going through OT classes, she was rather tall, taller than average, and found that a standard dressing stick was too short. This was aggravating to her. So she felt, we needed a better design. We actually found a engineering student who was looking for like an independent study project. We got them together, and at the first meeting, it came out that he was thinking like we're going to design like an exoskeleton to get like somebody who's paralyzed up and walking. And my student went, I just want them to be able to like pull pants on, like just very different. And it kind of, in the long run, they've actually created a really cool prototype and it worked out well, but like we started so far apart. And just
Beth, it seems like in some way that is so real world. And from my experience, I think that education can sometimes be so bubbled, so that is so real world that it's actually kind of perfect. Your problem, it seems real.
It was really kind of funny. And I was lucky that my student had enough of a sense of humor to go, well, I don't think we're going to manage that. And I think just, it took a while for her to be able to communicate, I know this looks small to her engineering partner, but I want you to understand what a big deal this would be to a lot of people. And so I think just getting them to bring their expectations more in line with each other was a big challenge.
There was also, the issue is that the statement of needs was kind of unclear to that engineering student.
Yes, and I do not know how that gap happened in the initial communication, but I think, yeah, you're right. Like that need hadn't been clearly communicated, and I'm sure he left that first meeting probably just as discouraged as my student was. But just getting, and that's on top of kind of just the challenges of just collaborating with the everyday logistics, different expectations between, engineering departments and therapy departments, different schedules. For us, we are actually physically located, not near engineering, as in on separate campuses in the same town. So, all those kind of like extra barriers, it all adds up and it makes that collaboration piece a lot more challenging. So when Rich talks about like, we designed this device and then had to ship it across Pennsylvania, well, okay, now we've added that, like you add all these extra barriers and it just adds to the challenges and sometimes the frustration, I think.
But thank God for things like Zoom. It didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. And now you can actually demo something for someone over a distance.
Right.
Yeah.
Although I think after a year and a half, some of my students, if they never saw Zoom again, it would be too soon. So.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we're all hoping that someday it's a novelty instead of like a daily need. Yeah. But I like the discussion of the challenges. Of course, it would be great if all the barriers were gone, but it is really, if we can kind of compare it to like the person with a disability, like the barriers are there, the challenges are real. We have these challenges, whether they're communication or follow through or design iteration or whatever it is. But it is also very not dissimilar from the person we're designing for. There's all these barriers, whether it's pulling up pants, getting through a door, or playing with their favorite book. I don't know.
Hey, Scott, I'd like to add in one thing. This is from the engineer's side. I don't know if it exists as much on the therapy side, but disabled people are scary. They don't move like the people I'm familiar with. They may drool and other things. So sort of going hands-on with them can be a little scary for people who've lived fairly isolated lives.
Right.
And so
they don't sound like
they sound strange. That's right. And that can be a barrier to these projects making progress, is that I mean, it's real. I hate to say it, but it's a real thing. And that I don't know if the therapist can provide that interface that makes it a little less scary, or whatever.
Ken, I think it's something that we don't talk about often. And I think that by the time you're in college, if you haven't been around folks with significant disabilities, if nothing else, having some interaction with some folks with significant disabilities is almost a service to broaden, I don't know, people's ability to handle diversity.
But you're going to find those engineers who simply can't handle it. And then you'll find other ones for whom
who simply choose not to open themselves to handle it.
But you'll find some who say, you know what, I feel stronger need to support these people than I do what I did for 20 years, which is try to extract as much work out of a call center agent as possible. That was my engineering work, and I got paid well for it. But when I look back on it, I think, my God, did I actually spend years doing that rather than having an impact that makes people's lives better?
Mm-hmm.
So you'll find engineers who, and it may just be a settling out process. You'll find the ones who really are not motivated at all in that area, and then you'll find ones that are. I don't know, maybe Rich has some insight there.
I think it's learned. I mean, you get familiar over time, it's exposure, and our clinicians just have a massive head start on the average engineer. I mean, I know when I worked at in pediatric, observed at pediatric clinics, you could tell which of the clinicians had kids and which didn't, because the ones that didn't have kids were kind of treating them like glass, and the ones that had kids were kind of tossing them around like they, like their bones were made of rubber. So it's the same thing, right? I mean, it was just, over time you learn, you get more comfortable, but I don't think it's, and I know that our therapy students, like, they've got to go do shadowing and all sorts of other stuff before they ever even get to us. So they've already had huge amounts of exposure that the average engineering student is just not going to have. But I was a computer science student. I made it all the way through college without meeting anybody with a disability, and in grad school, that's when I was not naturally immediately comfortable with people with disabilities, and you just learn over time.
Yeah, I think it's a good discussion. We are pretty much at the top of our hour. We could take this a few different ways, but if there's any last comments for today, I think we can have those. But otherwise, we are probably going to end our session, and we would love to have everybody back next month. Naomi, I'm sorry, our date is maybe the 19th next month.
I don't think we have a date set yet.
I thought, because let's see, I thought I saw it. Maybe I didn't.
It's not on the website.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'm wrong. All right. Well, that'll be to be announced. And
so, Scott, I have one closing thing. I'd love to see in the next, or very close to the next meeting, to start coming up with a way to get at these skills, this list of skills. And I'm hoping that Rich may be able to point us to some resources where we can, or even suggest some things. That would be a good place to start a foundation of those.
okay.
Because I don't want to just stop here and talk about process. I'd like to get to that skill list somehow.
Okay. All right. I think that's something we can work on for sure. And, you know, we'll take anybody who's here. Oh. Okay. Which is already giving us some.
That was my morning.
Okay.
Oh, Rich, as someone who spends time with those, I'm so sorry.
You got to do it.
Yep.
All right. Yes, but we can carry this on. If not in January, I'm assuming there will be one in January, but I know there's some big things going on, including ATIA, that will be around this time of the month. So if not here, then definitely in February. Naomi?
Yes, definitely in February.
Okay. All right. So we'll see what we can do, and we'll hopefully it'll be posted in a couple places, and Mike is very good about twittering it out. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I'm glad you could all join us, and we'll see you next time, right?